I change how I communicate? Can I personalize the language I use with you, what I say to you, what messaging, what banners that I apply? And that means the entire visual experience could be changed. And if it is conversational, I don't sit with the same problems that I typically have with hardwired design constructs, because hardwired design constructs, the tiniest change based on people's finger memory means that you want to make any change, you deal with a change problem. In conversational, most people have a way they communicate with humans, and on their chatbots, you'll be able to get some kind of feedback on what it is they're doing. And in intelligent sales, can I fulfill, based on the personal requirement, a series of actions that get me to a point where I can get a person to take an action? And then if I want to run experiments, how would I run my A/B, my offer-based, my multivariate, various kinds of tests to make sure that the interaction with the community that I'm targeting give me enough evidence of how I'm engaging with them? Series of pre-configured module assets can be deployed out of the box. You can deploy them fairly easily in your environment. And if you run on our prediction as a service infrastructure, you can spin these up and test them yourself without having to even run it in your own cloud environment if you wanted to. And there are a bunch of modules available that can be applied to solve a number of these interaction problems, especially around personalization issues. So let's switch gears into what we call interaction intelligence. Now, you know that we have a interaction science module. You know that a lot of our work is around understanding how we engage with people. We start with how we decide and select business-focused use cases. We believe that you need to break them up into different parts of thinking. The first thing is there a reliable way that you can interpret and describe the intent of the people that you are interacting with? If you are personalizing something for an employee, a client, or a customer, it is different than how you would do it between, let's say, one role in one segment, another role, one person versus another person. So you want to first abstract the intent of what you want to achieve. Can you learn continuously without having to go through the classical complexity of machine learning pipelines, data drift, and model drift? You want to have a dynamic capability that can dynamically converge and notify you when there are changes. By the time you take an action, you know that the action that you are taking is specific to the metric you are chasing. If you want to personalize for the purposes of engagement, or personalize for the purposes of a person buying to drive revenue, or to get a person to stop doing certain things, each of those will probably end up having very, very different criteria.
I just wanted to jump in there and ask something about the rate of learning. Just made me think of a scenario where you are engaging with your customer on some platform, whether it's a web page or through USSD or something like that, and they do something out of character, and you've selected an algorithm that applies a lot of weight to that action and starts recommending a lot of things that are like that, but then completely forgets who the person actually is, and that it is maybe just something impulsive and something kind of experimental. How do you manage that?
That's a great challenge to work on, by the way, Nicola. I think we've been reasoning about that for a long time, and I think there are easy ways and tough ways to solve that. The easy ways, if you think of the classical recommender approaches around collaborative filtering and matrix-based, non-negative matrix factorization, or any one of those approaches, all make an assumption that you will eventually look the same as everybody else. So that is not really personalized. That's why a lot of recommenders on retail stores and so on do not work well, because the moment it sees an anomaly, it fixates on that. And what often happens in classical reinforcement learning, without you having an ability into your cost or into your reward functions, and you don't have an ability to influence those, it means that the model will just pick one answer and get stuck there. What you're trying to figure out is to have a continuous feedback loop where the portfolio of models that satisfy the approaches based on your outcome. You've got a set of metrics that you want to achieve, and you want to make sure that you can track your performance against that evidence collection exercise, your rate of learning. Can you then pick? So can you use, like in our world, we've got a thing called a network selector. So you can select the model. You can use a model to decide the rate at which you want a model to learn. You can decide if you want a person to fixate quickly or early on. Maybe you want to select an algorithm that if the person sporadically do things that's out of the ordinary and it's an anomaly, can you use that kind of person to sell the items you normally do not sell to anybody else? We've got a number of anti-recommender algorithms to deal with those anomalies. Bringing all of those together, you have a better understanding of how humans really engage with their digital communities. Because on the one end, you want to make sure that you understand that, yes, there are preferences that are more long-running. You might have a calendar for that customer or segment that tells you something about how they behave. If you do something consistently on, let's say, the 4th of July, or your Thanksgiving setting is different than somebody else's, it means that people behave differently as a family during that time than any other time. Do you have a way to get the model to not even think about what the answer would be? It doesn't matter what the anomaly is. We have a number of different approaches to deal with that. And I think one last comment to make on that is that you also want to have an understanding of the degree of novelty that is essentially essential for that market to engage with you. So that means that how much of what you do is new will keep them excited about the next action. So if you take the classical interaction experimentation journey and how a sequence of cases could work, you want to start with a deliberate act of getting to know the customer based on who they are in the digital world, plus what they do with you. If you are a bank, a telco, an insurer, or a gaming company, the actions that they take and how they take them, you want to get a full spectrum capability to use different algorithms to learn. You then want to be able to drive your personalization based on intent. So if you have a certain scenario where personalization is not necessarily needed, then you're not going to do that. You could decide that there are cases where you want to treat everybody the same because of a certain commercial product you're launching or whatever you're doing. It's a bit like what happens on Netflix. If you have a family account and you've got a teenager and you're a retired person, and you watch, a certain kind of series and the teenager watch a different series, you don't want, even in the family setting, the one recommended to bleed into the other one at all. But when everybody is on the family account, you want to be able to pick something that is between those two extremes that everybody might be able to see useful. So you need to have a graph, a product graph, or a graph that you configure that helps you to straddle what it is that you engage with depending on the category. And especially when you move to the in the moment and engagement cases as you move down to the point where you maintain long-term relationships with your customers.
I just wanted to step in here and ask a question that's very commonly asked. How much is there a reliance on social media data, right? So everybody talks about, understand the person here and understand them on whatever these platforms are. Some of the best ways to get data on people is through social media. Is that something that's reliable or relied upon?
There's not a simple answer to that question. But in our world, what we've learned is that if you are a financial institution and you engage with your customers at a transactional level, and you have access to the customers' actual financial transactions of where they bought their coffee this morning, where they traveled to, when they bought an airline ticket, which retailers they buy their food from, very, very few people tweet, comment, share any of that evidence to the world. So you have to make an assumption that the social world are basically a representation of a person's alternative persona as to how they want the world to perceive them. If you are happy with that, then that's okay. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to use that, because you probably will end up using something like Google Analytics, or let's say your meta interface when somebody responded to a Facebook advert or whatever it might be, to enrich your understanding of that individual and how they behave. So I think that we've kind of looked at it in a multidimensional way. It's not just useful or not useful. Can you take the evidence that you have collected reliably, consistently, and continuously over periods of time and turn those into something valuable? There's far more sometimes to be learned from that than to look at a person's public persona. So you need to bring both together to make a full understanding of how that fits.
Cool, thanks. There's another question in the chat from Achana. When Web3 is mass adopted, how would that change personalization? I'm thinking in terms of limitations to data access.
Isn't it the opposite, that the Web3 movement is an expanded use of data access? Because now, if you think of in the Web2 world, and remember, the Web3 world is not an exclusive replacement of how the people see the Web2 world. So that means that Spotify is not overnight going to take all of your playlists and put them on a blockchain. Your bank is definitely not going to put all of your transactions on a blockchain. Your favorite telco company is not going to take every phone call ever made and make it accessible on a blockchain. We don't see that change maybe as radically as some people. What Web3 is giving you is an entry point into the entire chain. That means you got access to the entire block and the entire data set where historically you might not have had access to it. So you're still going to want to control your own customer data. And if you think of what happened with like Coinbase is a great example. Coinbase is got major exchanges and they kind of represent all kinds of different cryptos, but you still have to KYC directly. That means if they want to communicate with their customers, they already have your identity, your domicile. They know where you live. They know everything about you that you are not going to get if you are in a Web3 world. So the way we've seen the Web3 world kind of change in our narrative, instead of looking at it as a distributed web, as a kind of like a blockchain-based or some kind of distributed environment in that context, now we're seeing it as that Web3 means distributed access. That means, can I take all of what happened in the Web2 world from an API point of view that have exposed, and that's what you see with what happened in the AI world. Let's take an MCP, a model context protocol, and let's take EGE. You want to take an end-to-end view of your agent to explore agents in the world that can assist you to get to an answer. So we see that the Web3 definition is almost being recrafted in that context, rather than the context of just seeing it as something that is going to be distributed. Remember that more distributed means more open, not more closed. So it's almost the opposite effect that it's creating for us.
I wanted to add to that. It's an interesting discussion because what I understand from the Web 2 to the Web 3 transition is kind of that you have these huge tech conglomerates that own your data, and then Web 3 puts the power in the hand of the consumer or the user to kind of decide who has access to their data and take ownership of it. But I'm imagining myself in that scenario, and the things that personalization algorithms do for us, it's like, will customers want that to be taken away? Because it is useful. It helps us make choices in a world that's so saturated with different options. I think that maybe what could happen as well is just a kind of reorientation of how data is used, not so much one that's extractive from the consumer, but the consumer has more control over the intention behind the use of that data. That's my 2 cents on it.
But you know what, Nicola, what we have learned and what has been a stark reality for the crypto world is that Bitcoin broke through $120 a day or so ago, and I'm not sure how many people here have started selling their crypto and bought their yachts in the Caribbean. The reality is that out of the thousands of options available to you, if you are a $1 trillion company like Meta, or you look at the Magnificent Seven, if you are a Microsoft or a Google or an AWS or a Tesla or any of the companies that are controlling Alphabet and the like, that control an enormous revenue stream based on the fact that you are a primary owner of data, there is no evidence and there's no noise in the market around those companies exposing what they're doing. There's absolutely zero probability, from what I know about dealing with the people at Microsoft, that Microsoft is going to take LinkedIn, they spent $19 billion on, and make that accessible to the world through distributed storage. So that means we have to look at this realistically. The bottom line is that it doesn't affect us. There's still a human that engages with the digital ecosystem that wants options unique to them. There's been this large focus on, let's say, that Google will disappear. Let me quickly just do a quick, very practical example. Let's go to Google. I'm on an incognito window here, so it doesn't know who I am based on my normal profile. If I search for running shoes, it doesn't know if I'm male or female, what size foot I've got. It doesn't know my brand preferences. So that means there is no personalization unless I give the context regarding the answer that I'm expecting from Google. Now it shows ASICS, Nike. Where does this list come from? This list comes from the economic customer of Google's. That means somebody paying for that item to appear that says sponsored. You, as the participative customer, observe this and go, well, are any of these useful to me? So now let's say we pick something down here that's maybe not so popular or that's not so well known. Let's say we pick a floating running one, Adidas, women's Hoka Rincon 4. So then let's say I pick that one and I select it once, and it takes me to that. You'll see that it's tracking it. So that means it's personalizing it based on my digital story. Let's say I go back there and I select it again. Now what's happened is the rate of learning has collected 3 data points about a preference from somebody that it has known nothing at all about because my tracking is turned off. If I search for running shoes, you'll see that my entire inbox has now converged to me after 3 interactions. The model hasn't even converged after the 5th time, 10th time, 100th time tracking everybody. It immediately shifted my focus to the fact that I'm looking for a Hoka Ronin women's shoe. Now it knows, or it thinks it knows, that I'm a female looking for a certain shoe, and by the time I select the size, the tracking code would have personalized in the knowledge graph that answer to me specifically. Will Google want to lose control of this revenue model? And that's what I think we've been thinking about. There is a sense of reality in the interface between a Web 2 and a Web 3 world, and we straddle in all of those, obviously. In our case, if we get evidence of your interactions from a blockchain interaction or transactional base or a tracking code, I set the model up to converge instantaneously, and Google uses a Q-learning for that one I just showed you now. It's a reinforcement learning algorithm that converges almost instantaneously based on your actions if it doesn't know anything. But if I had to use, let's say, my own profile, it knows that I like an ASICS kind of shoe, and every now and then I'll search for alternatives to this particular ASICS shoe. You'll see that the first 3-4 pages are retailers targeting only that kind of shoe type to me because it then has already learned something about me. So it will take more unique actions for the model to shift its behavior. That just means that your interaction science algorithms can converge quite differently, and you want to be able to use it. So by the time you get to, let's take that, even the Google example, banners or messages or buttons or interaction options, and you start tracking offers, like what happened there with a specific targeted offer to me as a person, you'll find that your journeys that make it personalized and do your cross-sell and upsell all can become quite unique to you as an organization because you can track it based on that individual action. So by the time you apply it, let's say to a telecommunications company, and you want to learn progressively more about a person's actions, or you want to be able to figure out how a customer is going to engage with you in a cold start, yeah, you typically will use social media or other alternative data sets to learn more about a person. But by the time you engage with me and you start interacting, I start understanding the next action. It starts getting personalized based on what I think you need to do to get your action done. And by the time you sign up, I've now identified you. I know who you are. I know what you're spending on. I know what you are intending to do with what I'm giving you. All of a sudden, the options are now in the contextual space because I can set the context on not just people like you, but on you, plus people like you. And I can decide how I explore across the various options. By the time you've been with me for long periods of time, I'm interested in keeping you active. That means that I get to know you. I get to know your rituals, your changing behaviors, the spectrum of your personality, so that I can target and help you to get to a point where you engage with me continuously with highly specific targets all the way through to the messaging that I might want to use eventually to you. So maybe a piece that will be useful to get through this session, I know we're heading towards the end of our meetup, is maybe just to discuss some of the theoretical backing around how we see the evolution of the personalization story. The first thing is that it doesn't matter how you see the human engaging with a digital system. Either way, you're going to want to know something about the individual versus the collective. So that means that how and under what conditions would that individual want to have things that are highly unique to them. So if you have an individual consumer relationship or independent collective, it's basically your classical general segmentation. And this is what I think most companies at least got some angle on. People have got an understanding of their target market, their addressable market. They know how to go after that. But by the time you have collected evidence about a person's interaction at an individual level versus a collective level, at a collective level, have I learned enough about the way you look in the context of other people that behave like you, and then extract from there something that's just about you? through conversation, I learn something about you that is unique to you that will get me out of the broadcast space. Because a broadcast is when I just push out into the world some generic content. I don't understand what you like and don't like. I want to have permission-based marketing. I want a continuous engagement. I want a conversation with you that gives me evidence of what to do next. There are categories or features I consider, because if it's a consumer-based interaction, your brand importance is enormous, because you will never get to like a client relationship when you go to your dentist or your doctor or your lawyer, where you have an interaction where the person understands who you are through conversation. But when you think about you buying toothpaste at your local retail store, you have no idea who designed it, who engaged with it, who packed it on the shelf, who priced it, who decided that there's a blue stripe in Colgate. So that means that, and you can't phone them up and say, I want that to be green. There is no customization allowed. So that means you move in a consumer world with hyper standardization, very focused, all the way through to the client world that is about customization. But what does it actually mean? How does it play out in our world? It means that you need to understand what it is that you are engaging with. If you are engaging with, let's say, an existing product to an existing market, and they already purchase it, and you didn't have to convince them about anything, your job is to retain or to regain if somebody hasn't bought anything from you based on your brand and you behave like a consumer company. But if you learn more about the person, you need dynamic capabilities. You need to figure out that if I'm going to sell something new to new customers, I need to provide them with new options beyond the basic options I used to give them before. So that means that if I bring all of these together, every single intersection helps me figure out a strategy to get to a certain target based on where I want to personalize. So if I want to personalize on, let's say, customerization as one of our constructs, now take one dimension, operational customization, and the other dimension, marketing customization. Most retail or consumer companies work on generic mass messaging only, and that's what we call standardization. Standardization means that I'm selling you what I've always known. As soon as I want to customize operational capabilities, the way you interact with me, or the marketing, I need a slightly different approach to be applied. Because now, if I'm going to personalize, and I want to personalize a message to you, and I sell you something that is unique to you as a person, but that I provide generically, I don't have to operationally change anything. But as soon as I sell you something that I require operational changes for, then apply the concept of what's called mass customization. You have a slightly different strategy. If you haven't figured out where these fit and you want to run experiments to find out how people are going to change their behaviors over time, you then run a customerized view. Because customerized is essentially, can I create an approach of engagement with you that is unique to you in the context of its message and its content, and then have the ability to alter the way that I service you based on the option that you take. And that's where we see, where we started this entire journey. Conversational-based interactions are enormously helpful for companies to learn about how they can deal with a personalization story, and especially if they want to do some kind of hyper-personalization.
I think we have a question. You can go for it.
I'm Archana. I was just wondering, so everything that you described here on this matrix is super cool, but it seems like there's a focus on new customers. But I just had thoughts regarding how does this apply if the plan or the focus is customer retention. In that case, I think if you look at the top row, right? So like that entire row would be customerization then, because if we're looking at customer retention, then I think even if potentially profit might be low, but there's more operational cost to it, I might still want to consider giving them more of a product fit than market focus. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. And what you're raising is something we agonize over kind of all the time. And that is that it doesn't matter how you cut the scenario, and especially when you think about selling to a customer for the first time where you don't know them at all, and what you would be willing to decide in the context of the messaging to gain them as a customer. And then once they are a customer, what you are willing to do to retain them normally becomes case specific. If you have, let's say that you want to take all the customers that engage with you continuously and consistently over long periods of time, where it shows low degrees of variation, you can fairly reliably take that kind of data set and train a model on it, and it will be able to service customers that even show traits of maybe churning. But as soon as you sell something new, or you have no evidence, you have zero understanding of exactly how they're going to behave other than what you've gained up until that moment. So what this is recommending you think about is that your algorithms need to be dynamic so that they can converge in real time. Like the Google example I showed you earlier, you want the convergence to be almost instantaneous. And then start learning if the person shows traits of not liking the option you've already converged. So it is an ongoing conversation as to where you draw the line. But in this context, if it is marketing customization high, so I want to change messaging as to how I speak to you, and I sell you something that requires me to run a new agent system or a new interaction behind the scenes, we call that customization. It requires more work to make it operationally feasible. Batch-based static machine learning or static AI models are inherently good at looking at static data. That means non-personalized options. To have personalized options work means you need real-time AI or real-time machine learning where models can converge in real time. That means it can dynamically adjust its behavior based on how I engage with you, especially if I use reinforcement learning and I get real-time feedback about how you use what you're using from me. So we think there are often approaches and challenges that you can kind of raise with this, but also a number of them that are solved by having a portfolio view of options, especially if you've got an agentic journey that can assist with your personalization deployment. So you can tackle it at a broad spectrum implementation when you want to get your models to converge around the person's individual behaviors.
Great. I think I'll open the floor to some questions. If anyone has some burning thoughts. Go for it, Vincent.
Cool. So I was just thinking, you know, they say trends cycle. So what was cool then becomes old and then it becomes cool again later, right? Is there for the AI to maybe predict trends?
Great question. So we have an offline process that does the prior, you extract the priors from historical bits of evidence. And if you think of classical time series-based analytic, normally tries to remove seasonality. What we try to do is identify seasonality, then use the seasonality to create calendars that give you anchors that you then score from. So you can set an anchor. Let's say that you want behaviors to converge around a certain time of the year or a certain group of people, depending on what is specific to that person. You then want the priors to only be applied to that region. We also got geospatial models. We look at it in time, place, and act. We have a time graph around time changes. Place, is there a geographical location shift in where the person is doing what they're doing? And then act, is there an act graph? Is there a way in which the person, and I'll give you an example. Somebody is on their way on a train to a sports event. They may buy airtime. Then they get to the sports event, they're in the geofence. Now, I don't want to sell you a complex product. I want to give you a single option. Here's a 1 gig bundle for 1 hour and a video option included that you can spend $12 on instead of buying a 1 gig bundle for $10. So you throw in something that it makes it a no-brainer because the time dimension and the act of the person acting as they want to watch, maybe they're sitting in the part of the stadium where they can't see what's going on. They want to then purchase it right there. So you can change those actions, definitely. Yeah, so time is a very, very important component of everything we do. The time graph is embedded in the entire scoring engine.
And then on average, how far does it go back?
Depends on cost of compute. On our test rig, we run, I think at the moment, there's about a 20 terabyte infrastructure that run a couple of trillion transactions that keeps on just churning away and keeps on running to see if there are any issues. And we look at how algorithms converge, and you can decide how far back you go. So it's purely a data cluster design challenge. We use a data storage infrastructure that is set up in a way that you normally would set up a couple of terabytes, and then you give it compute to make sure you got your real-time versus offline logging so that you can go and pick up priors either at a personal level or a collective level. If you're going to pick up priors around the entire population, let's say you've got a client with 200 million customers, are you going to want to check priors across 200 million customers every minute? No. So you set the context. You will decide the context that will set the prior if you want to do a real-time convergence, depending on how small or big you want to make that. Yeah. So it's a cost of compute and the time response difference. Yeah.
Archana, you can go for it.
Finally able to turn on my camera. I actually teach digital marketing at the University of Delaware. I'm an assistant professor there. And so my question is a little, I guess, not completely off topic, but a little bit. Academia is notorious for being slow with catching up with industry. And I'm trying to get a lot of these concepts into my classroom, and I teach undergrads. My goal is, even if they're able to use words like agentic workflows or words related to AI a lot, but without actually understanding what it means. It could be as simple as prompt engineering, right? I really try to teach it as a science, but they think they could just get any response from GPT and use it. So I try to teach them that context is important. My question is, how do I introduce all this stuff in the classroom? Like, do you have ideas on how can I really dummy it down without losing a lot of this meaning? For example, when we speak about thinking about these different use cases for algorithms that can personalize content, right? So for example, I used to use Optimizely a lot to teach them how to A/B test landing pages for different search keywords. But even that is very overwhelming to them. And by the time I include anything in my syllabus, it's already outdated in the industry. So my question really is, do you guys have any ideas on how do I integrate all this in my classroom? When you think of yourself as employers, what are you looking for when you recruit undergrads? Maybe
two parts to that. We're out of time, but we can give you a quick glimpse of this. The one is follow any of the ecosystem people on LinkedIn or the company. You'll see that even I do a lot of teaching as well. So we found that teaching it not just give you the angle, but you can, kind of give people a view of how some of these things work. I used to teach California State for years as well, UCLA and the like. But the idea is that you want to have an understanding as to what the common conversations are. So if you follow people like some of the people, or myself, whatever, you'll see that I post a few times a week new content. Then the other part is that I think for undergrad, it is a challenge because undergrad normally you make the assumption that the people that you're teaching are going to be able to take a generic concept, and then by the time they get to postgrad, apply it in a bit more of an advanced environment. So you need to decide what that curriculum. So I think that any AI capabilities, especially with prompt engineering, like the courses that are being promoted by like Anthropic or OpenAI, Anthropic released a whole series of programs that I think are brilliant, especially for undergrad, because it talks to what does a token generator really do? Because most people don't understand how the basics work. So I think at an undergrad, you want to teach a business person, not the technicalities, but what the concept is. So when they use it, they know that generative models are actually not so good at knowledge retrieval. It's good at token generation. And you need to provide it the knowledge to find the answer to be reliable. If you explain the concepts, then Anthropic and some of the big core tech companies have great material for that. We draw on that all the time in the context of the academic scenario. But we can take us offline as well. If you connect with us on LinkedIn, you'll see Nicola here, so we'll all be able to share the material that we've been using. We can definitely share it with you for sure.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. I mean, you're all going to have to be guest speakers in my class very soon.
All good. Well, yeah, in Delaware, we registered in Delaware. We don't go there that often. I'm kind of more New York and San Francisco, so it depends on, yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much, everyone. We actually have another session straight after this. It's one of our first it's a tech session that gives a bit more of a hands-on view of the actual product. If you're curious about that, there's a link in the chat that Madison dropped if you want to hop on that meeting. But if not, thank you, everyone, and enjoy your evening.
Thanks, Nicola. Ciao.